Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome back to Blackish University. I wanted to take some time to address a lot of the violence that's going on in Chicago. Now, you hear different things from different sources, right? There's people who aren't even from Chicago talking about some of the violence and how deadly it is in Chicago. And yes, I will admit that Chicago. There's definitely quite a bit of violence, and it's definitely something that we have to curb. But I wanted to take some time to explain what exactly is happening in Chicago for those of you that might not understand who effed it up, right? Well, as a lot of you might know, I'm originally from Chicago. I was born and raised in the Humboldt Park neighborhood and spent most of my days on the northwest, and west side of Chicago, really only moving away to Northern Illinois University as an early adult to pursue a higher education. Now, I love Chicago, but it's not the city it once was. And our mayor and her leadership team, they just seem incredibly clueless about how to turn the city around. Now, Mayor Lightfoot, it's not your fault, right? The violence and gang problems have multiplied. This is years of uh, violence and gang problems, and there's a social structure that's very complex in Chicago, and it's going to take not only drastic action, but it's going to take some time to untangle the web of issues that we're currently dealing with. Unfortunately, Mayor Lightfoot, it doesn't seem like you have the respect of the overall community. I'm sure you did a great job, some of your initiatives, and good for you. But I highly doubt that you'll remain in office for another term. In fact, I don't think you should run. I think in Chicago we need very unique leadership. Yes, we do need additional social programs and housing programs and COVID testing spots, but your first priority as mayor of Chicago should be to protect the citizens. I believe last I checked, we were over 1,000 homicides for the first time since the early 90s. There's just random crimes that are like opportunity crimes, right? It's something that's becoming unpredictable that you can't really get a good grasp on. People are going into other areas where they're probably not from and also committing crimes because there's a higher likelihood that they're going to get something of value. So we need we need a mayor who's going to be tough on crime, but we also need to make some major changes in Chicago if we want to kind of curb what's going on the west and south side of Chicago, really everywhere in Chicago. But it's important for you guys to know that aren't from Chicago. People call it Chirac and stuff. Not everyone co-signed that from the city. Now, Chicago, the concentration of violence is really in a handful of communities. Now, if you're on the north side or even the northwest side, you're relatively safe. But as always, when you're in Chicago, you got to move with caution. You could be on the west side, but know that you're going from the convenience store back to your car. You're going, you're not getting out your air gauge and checking your tire because it looks low. You're not messing around with the kid seats and stuff. You got to get in, get buckled in, and hit the road. Get everything squared away in a well-lit parking lot in a Jewel Osco or a Walmart. But there's a lot of crimes that happen when someone's just driving around and they're looking for a victim. And they're looking for somebody who's probably 28 to 45 years old, right? Middle class, might have some cash on him, a nice cell phone, possibly a weapon. These are things that you got to move with purpose when you're in Chicago, regardless of where you are. But know that the higher volume, the concentration of crimes are happening on the west side of Chicago and the far south side of Chicago, possibly even the far north side. But when you start saying that, it's like there's a small part of Chicago River North, Logan Square, Lincoln Park, Lakeview, where it's actually safe to live. But now what we're seeing is you're also a Vic, right? You're out walking your dog with your puffy vest on in your Starbucks. Well, people are starting to realize that it's a lot. You're a lot more successful with small inner city crime if you do it in large numbers, right? It's just like the drug game. You know how many ships come in from other places that contain huge volumes of cocaine, marijuana, well, a ton, because the Coast Guard might get a few of them, but it doesn't matter. We offset the cost by having more ships come in successfully, right? So you're getting a small percentage, but you're not. It's impossible to get all of them, and that's why you see successful looting, right? There's not enough crime. I mean, there's not enough cops that can really grab just anyone when you have let's say 50 people or more looting in downtown Chicago. It's really hard to grab 50 people, right? And possibly much more than that. We always see that with rioting and looting. Look at way back in 1992 with the Rodney King riots in LA. The cops basically backed out and just let everyone tear down and burn down stores. Now, I'm telling the future mayor or Mayor Lightfoot this, the city's not going to take it too well, the business community, if you're letting stores get looted. People are vandalizing stores, or they're having a higher amount, or it's more likely to have a smash and grab happen. You got to take care of Chicago, but you also got to take care of the inner more urban inner city as well. So there has to be a unique balance, and we need a mayor that can walk that line. And for the younger generation, you might not understand how cool Chicago once was. You've probably seen videos on Chicago violence if it's not in your community. You probably heard about violence prevention initiatives in schools, but I'm not sure that there's an accurate resource or a resource at all that tells you exactly what happened in Chicago. And again, who effed it all up, right? Well, in the 90s, and that's where I'm from. I was born in 82, so I was a teen in the 90s. There was a very complex social structure in our neighborhoods. To outsiders, some of our neighborhoods looked super hood. You take Humboldt Park, let's say, right? Most people would be scared to go to Humboldt Park in the 90s. There are guys walking the block. People are drinking 40s. Girls are dressed cute, and they're walking up and down North Avenue or Division. But a gang member might actually see your mom coming home from Aldi or Walmart, and they're going to put their cigarette out before she walked away as a sign of respect. They don't want to blow smoke in your mom's face. They might call the shorties, which were the younger kids that wanted to join the gang. They would call the shorties out to help her with her bags. If you tagged on someone's house with graffiti in the neighborhood, you got a mouth shot. That mouth shot was called a violation. If you didn't go to the park to get your mouth shot, they catch you by your school, catch you walking home. The whole neighborhood was in on it. It's nothing personal, but you had to get checked. If you were caught selling drugs on the block, you got a violation. If you were riding around in a stolen car and you parked it in the hood on your block, that's a violation. You're making the block hot. People are here trying to make money and trying to make adult moves, and you're over here on some kiddie stuff, doing little small armed robberies, breaking into cars that people leave open. You're making the block hot for other people that are trying to get real money out here. So there was a social structure and a hierarchy to gang life that a lot of people, I think to this day, don't really understand. It might look like some of our neighborhoods are jacked up, but I love growing up in Humboldt Park. There was a level of safety because we knew how to move, again, with purpose. We didn't go hanging around. We learned how to mind our business. And when somebody hit the floor, everybody hit the floor. when somebody ran, we all ran. And we did hood stuff too. We played in abandoned buildings. We built apartments and foreclosed garages. We rode our bikes throughout the city. And then we sat on the stoop just roasting each other until it was time to go to sleep. And we wake up and we're going to do it again the next day. We're going to meet at Mr. Submarine and all plan our day out from there. And that was kind of what you did. You could run through the neighborhood. As kids, you could park your bike outside of people's houses, and you might even go inside their house and have some juice, a sandwich, or maybe check out your friend's older sister. Life was good. But as we got older, things changed, and most of you are probably wondering, what changed? How did it deteriorate? How did the quality of life deteriorate in Chicago so much over the last decade or two? And, I think a lot of this, we can trace it back to Mayor Daley. And for a lot of you younger guys, I don't know if you recognize the name, you should, but Mayor Daley Sr. was a mayor in Chicago for quite some time. Decades, I want to say, maybe 20 years or so. I don't really know off the top of my head. And then eventually his son, who I know is from my generation, he was a mayor most of my youth. Okay, and he was just our mayor. It was no one ran against him. He was tough on crime, but it seemed to be within reason. And there was a balance in Chicago with power, crime, and greed. Yes, the city wasn't perfect by any means, but again, there's a balance, a very unique balance that is Chicago. Now, after Mayor Daley retired, there was a huge movement to clean up the city of Chicago, right? All these people are running for mayor, the original Make It Great Again team, and they were really heavy on breaking up gangs. They heavily targeted small drugs and petty crimes, and they attempted to disband criminal organizations. They even tore down entire housing projects like Cabrini Green on the city's north side. Now, it's important for the younger generation to realize how street gangs were back in the 90s. And it wasn't like what you might be used to today. And now gangs were different in the 70s and 80s as well. But in the 90s, street gangs were compared to Fortune 500 companies for their organizational skills and, let's be honest, their ruthless pursuit of profits. But now they're mostly made up of small, what most would consider leaderless sets of members. So they're bound together more by personal relationships, you and your boys, versus, let's say, a narcotics trade kind of organization. So today, you can get into beef with somebody and have a little petty conflict, and it can be inflamed by, let's say, a social media post. And this something like this can lead to a shooting. But again, right now there's a anything goes atmosphere on the streets. Now, the cause of violence in Chicago is complex, and it defies simple explanation. But police and other experts identify the fracturing of Chicago's gangs as an apparent contributor. Now, it's no secret that the nature of street gangs has changed, but it's less centralized now. There's not that hierarchy within the organization. Now, the police have also spoke frequently about how this has hurt our communities. So what happened is when you the violence is unpredictable. There's not a head boss that's giving orders. Now, for the most part, gangs are normally leaderless inside jail, right? There's a structure, there's someone who you can report to, but there's a constant flow of people, unlike being on the streets. So, and now you look at the violence in Chicago, and there's gangs like the Latin Kings that still appoint a leader, right? Someone known as an Inca, to supervise members that are behind bars. But with Spanish gangs, they largely continue to operate under that traditional hierarchy. And law enforcement is still looking to break down, and they have all these indictments, right? They're rounding up dozens of Latin King leaders and members on the even in the suburbs. But it's so important to remember that there's a structure to this. You can't go around and you can't treat Chicago like it's the Middle East. You can't remove a person of power because you don't like the negative parts of their operation and put somebody else in and think that there's not going to be chaos. And and what happened with Chicago, you removed all of these gang leaders, but you didn't replace them with anyone. So, when cops interview gang members when they try to get information after someone's arrested, you get a lot of these guys, big gangs like the GDs, the Gangster Disciples, where they say, I don't answer to anyone. Not too many years ago, the organization of Chicago gangs was very different. From the 1970s into the early 2000s, street gangs in Chicago were growing. These were organizations, again, that had the hierarchy it was really built to reap the benefits of the drug trade. So often the highest ranking members had a ton of power and influence beyond just petty street crime. I mean, you had people like Jeff Fort, Willie Lloyd, Larry Hoover, that, these guys are controlling multi-million-dollar drug operations, and there's literally armies with thousands of soldiers. Some of these guys might even get into a bit of politics. But again, a lot of these gangs now in Chicago, they still identify as the old, what you would call, nations. So you got the GDs, the Stones, the Vice Lords, the Four Corner Hustlers. But again, they're now in smaller subsets. And these are subsets that don't necessarily answer to other groups. They got subsets, Killer War, Terror Dome, Gutterville. And then you got to take a look at what happened with public housing. So someone had the idea that we were going to scatter public housing. It makes sense in theory. Again, you want to take people so they're not in a super bad neighborhood. You want to tear down that public housing, and then you want to scatter these people throughout Chicago. One, I think you did it because you probably wanted what would be valuable land, like with Cabrini Green and Lincoln Park, or with Lathrop Homes on Diversey and Damon. But you didn't think about the disruption to gang structure and the way that they do business. Now, I know that's not the top of people's minds when they're trying to disrupt a gang, but there's a certain structure in place. When you put these people all throughout Chicago, you make it very complex to, these are people that have affiliations to different factions. So there's a lot of problems in Chicago. Some of these are systemic and just pervasive problems, and they're not going to end with marches on a highway. But, we need to be real. We need to be real with each other, and of course, Black Lives Matter. But we have to realize, and this is coming from a Black person himself, everyone else is not the problem. We are part of the problem as well. If we're going to blame police, if we're going to blame lack of opportunity, if we're going to blame gun sales, then we should also be taking a harder stance on hip hop, right? Violence has been happening in our world long before hip hop. Why blame hip hop now, right? Well, hip hop might not be the initial cause of violence, but I can make an argument that it perpetuates Black stereotypes and negatively affects our equal rights movement. In today's real world, we do have opportunities. Now, things are far from perfect, but we have a lot of opportunities to better ourselves and better our community. But in today's world, it's our own minority children and teenagers that are the ones distributing, discriminatory and controversial images of themselves. It's now the hip hop lifestyle that also sends the message that we're ghetto, loud, dangerous, uncivilized. And I hear a lot of calls about defunding the police, and I have to stop and think, like, yo, why are we not looking at reforming certain types of hip hop that promote racism, misogyny, drug use, and even discrimination or colorism? If we as a people continue to reinforce the stereotypes that have held Black people back for decades, if we continue to teach our youth that it's okay to be aggressive, it's okay to hold a thuggish stance in public, always have a mad look for females, resting bitch face is cool, it's the authentic way to thrive. I'm sorry, but we're causing more harm than good. How can we as intellectuals not argue that glorifying crime and drugs, displaying drugs and showing violent criminal behavior wouldn't have a powerful and negative effect upon how Black people are perceived in the world? What about how they influence younger generations that might not understand that hip hop has an artistic vision? Not everyone is living their life like this. Like, yeah, I hear the argument, right? I love hip hop. I'll start by that. I love hip hop. I've been listening to it all my life. And yes, there have always been other negative media influences in gangster movies, right? Like Scarface, The Sopranos, The Godfather. And they show violence and misogyny. But there isn't a group of impressionable, oppressed teens that are looking to define themselves and their way of life around it. Is that understood? Like, hip hop culture and hood authenticity have become the cornerstone of Black identity. And the message is simply getting people killed. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, there's a specific term that's used by the military for using mass media communication to persuade, change, and influence audience. Now, it's something called a psychological operations campaign, or some people would simply call it PsyOps. Now, I don't want to go too off topic, but this is an advanced tactic that's used to really silence the population about what's happening in certain communities. So, what the Army has found is if you devalue the enemy and you position them as hostile, ignorant, lazy, bad for humanity, people tend to care less when you decide to kill them, imprison them, replace their leaders, or in our case, restrict voting rights and call them 3/5 of a man. Right? Look at how the U.S. military vilified and demonized former Iraqi President Saddam Hussein, who was once a U.S. ally, or terrorist Osama bin Laden, who also worked closely with the U.S. administration before we set out to kill them. Right? We did such a good campaign here in the U.S. that people were clapping when these men were killed. And not to say that it was, it was right or wrong, but that's what a psychological operations campaign is. And we have to ask ourselves, have we unwillingly unleashed a PsyOps campaign on our own people? It doesn't matter if it was intentional or not. Like, let me clarify. I love hip hop. I support hip hop. Hip hop does a lot of good in the community. It was great in the 80s and 90s, but man, ever since gangster rap in the 90s, and then people, it's like artists are caught. I don't know if a lot of you know what a gilded cage is, but it's basically, think of a bird, and you think of a bird in a cage, and it has the illusion of freedom, right? But they're still in this constrained or restrained position. If you would, that you think of a rapper, they might not be from the hood, but they're these CB4 rappers, right? They have to have this identity to be considered as that person in their hood, and they have to uphold that truth. And I think that's what's going on. There's a lot of hip hop. It's how do you define cool? How do your kids define cool? And if it's the person that's rapping that's getting all this attention and money, and they're glorifying a lifestyle that a lot of these kids don't realize these artists just don't live, right? A lot of these artists are multimillionaires. They're not on the block, and some of them might never have been on the block. But that message is getting kids killed. And, I support hip hop, but we got to do better. And, and we're just tiptoeing around the topics that we really need to go over. And it's like we need not only a mayor in Chicago that understands this, but we need someone that can give the city the hard truth. Yes, we need to be harder on crime, but we need more programs in the inner city areas to get these kids moving, doing stuff, have a positive outlook towards the future. We can't just shut off the west and south side like it doesn't exist. And just when it starts coming out and crime starts creeping out to the north side, now we're waving a flag that we want help. No, a city has to represent all of the people. And we need someone that understands, we need to focus on the development of the downtown area. Yes, we need to focus on airports. Yes, we need social services. Yes, we need more funding for schools. But you need to keep the citizens of Chicago safe. I don't care if you need to put an officer every so many blocks or a car every so many blocks or set up mini stations, but there's no reason that Chicago should be a crime zone right now with 1,000 deaths, 1,000 homicides. It's just unacceptable. It truly is. And I hope it changes. This isn't the city that I love, the city I grew up in. But it's somewhere that needs someone that can stand up and say, I need to be in these streets to make change. And hopefully we can find someone that's willing to step up and get this done. Thanks for checking us out. Check out blackishuniversity.com. Make sure to like and subscribe as well. Check you guys out later.